Coming up on Liberty's Voice, my personal tribute to the great Rush Limbaugh, such a dear friend. We all miss him. In the war with Iran. Yes, you heard me. The coming war with Iran. Go! Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Liberty's Voice. Welcome to show number 2. You know, I got a complaint yesterday, and I thought, well, it's a good complaint, but I don't know what to do about it. It was a viewer in Britain, and she said, what a great show, your inaugural show, but you said, hello, Mr. and Mrs. America. I'm British. I understand that, and I'm sure we have viewers all over the world, but what am I supposed to do? Hello, world. It's a great, beautiful world out there. I appreciate all our viewers from all over the world. But I am who I am, as Popeye used to say. That's a cartoon. So hello, Mr. and Mrs. America, and the rest of the world. Thank you for being here. So we're going to cover 2 topics today. We're going to cover Iran, because it's very important, because I feel in my gut it's just a matter of time until we strike that heinous, genocidal regime in our own defense, in defense of the Iranian people, in defense of the region. That is, in defense of humanity. But before I do that, yesterday was the 5th anniversary of the passing of Rush Limbaugh. And I wanted time to digest it and think about it, because a lot of people talk about Rush, who was crucially important to this country and is horribly missed. Can you imagine if we had Rush today helping us in the cause of liberty, the cause of Americanism, and also pushing back against the Jew haters, the Christian haters, the Tarlsons, the Kellys, the Bannons, and the rest? He'd be at the forefront. Now, how do I know this? Rush and I were like this. Like this. The fact of the matter is, when he was hearing and when he could hear, we would talk on the phone almost every night, sometimes till 1:30 in the morning. He stayed up late like I do. His real vice was those damn cigars. You know, he passed away from cancer, and but they were nonstop. But that said, we would talk about everything and anything. I remember when I was asked to do a radio show. I never really pursued it. I was asked to do a radio show in New York on WABC. And I thought, you know, let me give this a try, because I was given like the worst slot in radio, which was Sunday, 12 to 2 p.m. You know, and people are going to church, and Sunday, and, you know, people want to cool off a little bit. And I said, I think I should give this a try. I mean, after all, it's the biggest talk station in America. It's WABC in New York. I've been a fan of that station my whole life. Rush is on that station. Sean was on that station, although in the evenings. And I said to Rush, what do I say that you and Sean haven't already said? And he said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, but Mark, the audience hasn't heard from you. From you. I said, wow, you mean? He said, Mark, we talk every night. Talk to the audience. And that's what I've done ever since. And on WABC in New York, when I eventually got a program at 6 p.m. at their request, it was 1 hour, then 2 hours, then 3 hours, and ABC Radio Network decided to syndicate me. It was called the Killer's Row. It would be Rush Limbaugh, 12 to 3, Hannity, 3 to 6, Levin, 6 to 9. It was Killer's Row. I can remember we used to defeat the Yankees and the Mets in the ratings. It was a big deal. So I decided I was going to write a book. I was going to write a book about the courts. And I wrote a book about the courts. And Rush said, let me take a look at that book before it was out. So it was in, printout form off the printer. So I sent it to him, and he read it. He said, you know what I'd like to do for you? write the introduction. I said, really? At this point, he had anointed me F. Lee Levin, the head of his legal division. F. Lee Levin, after F. Lee Bailey. Those of you who never heard him, Google it. I'm not necessarily a big F. Lee Bailey fan. He's passed away, certainly in his latter years, but he also worked on the O.J. Simpson trial and so forth. What happened is I started to listen to Rush. Like everybody else, I said, who is this guy? He's unbelievable. He's hilarious. He takes no prisoners. He's advancing the cause. And I became friendly with Catherine Gleason, who he called Cookie, because, you know, he was never PC, Rush, and he was always attacked for it. And I began to hear Rush talk about some legal issues, some constitutional issues, and so I would, back then, fax to her my thoughts about the Constitution or the law, and I said he might be interested in this. And the way his setup was back then, she would have to run down the hallway from the fax machine down to his office and give it to him. And he was always appreciative. He said, tell Mark, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then one day out of the blue, he said, F. Lee Levin, the head of my legal division. Well, there was no legal division, of course. And from that point forward, I would provide substantial information on the Constitution, on the law, and so forth and so on. He's a man who was so generous, so generous. I had a bad heart. I still do, but I had a bad heart. I had a big problem. And my insurance, it wasn't clear that they would pay for it. So he's talking to me, and I said, Rush, I'm going to be gone a few days. Well, where are you going? I think I said, I'm going to the Cleveland Clinic. He said, how you getting there? I said, he said, let me send my plan. I said, no, I've got this. I'm going there. But thank you. He said, is your insurance covering this? I said, honestly, I don't have any idea. You know what he said? I'll pay for it. I said, well, it could be tens of thousands. I don't know what it. He said, I'll pay for it. I never got a salary or income, for the legal things that I would do. I did it because I wanted to help him and support the cause. Anyway, the insurance did cover it, all but the initial amount, I think, was $1,500 or $2,500. This is many years ago. And obviously, I paid that out of my pocket. And he said, by the way, F. Lee, he still called me F. Lee, unless he was very serious. He would say, hey, Mark, what happened with that bill? I said, well, the insurance covered it, except for this deposit amount. I paid that. He said, well, let me write you a check. I said, no, I'm okay. This is the way he was. When I wrote a book called Rescuing Sprite, he read the book. He said, I want you to come down to Palm Beach. I want you to come into my studio. I want to interview you in person about this book. I said, really? He said, this is a heartfelt book. People need to hear this side of you. I said, well, okay, I appreciate that. What happened was my dog Sprite, our dog Sprite, passed away. We had to put him to sleep. And that's the first time we ever did that. And I was heartbroken. I'm always heartbroken. I get very down, even depressed. I shut my door. I usually lose 25 pounds or something like that. I won't eat. It's just very upsetting to me. So we did that. And the interesting thing about that book was it was an accident. I had agreed with Simon & Schuster to write a book that would become Liberty and Tyranny. It's a book that had been in my mind for 30 years, 20 years, 30 years. And Spritey passed away, and I told Simon & Schuster I'm not interested in writing a book anymore. And David Limbaugh, who's my lawyer, along with my wife, but he was my lawyer then as well, he suggested to Simon & Schuster, why don't you let him write a book about his dog? And then he'll write the book that became known as Liberty and Tyranny, the #1 conservative book in the last 25 years. They said, okay, write it, but let's move it. We want to push the big book. So I wrote it, and talked about it. Rescuing Sprite was on with Rush. And it went up to number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list. So what did the folks at Simon & Schuster say? By the way, great publisher for me. Why don't you spend some time talking about that book until you write your next book? Because it became a big hit. But that was Rush. And there's so many other things I could tell you that are confidential that I don't want to go into when he had his difficult times. I remember the time that I had this bright idea. I thought it would be hilarious. I was at Landmark Legal Foundation president there. I called my buddies over and I said, I'm going to nominate Rush for the Nobel Peace Prize. That will drive them nuts. And we looked it up and they said, you can't nominate Rush for the Nobel Peace Prize. You have to be this category, this people, this. So who cares? Media won't know. I'm going to nominate him. So I called Rush and said, hey, I'm going to nominate you for the Nobel Peace Prize. F. Lee, that's a great idea. Let's go ahead and do that. So I nominated him. We wrote a whole letter to the Nobel Committee or whatever it was, and we put out a big release. And so Rush would say, I've been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. It was a big shtick that we did. So the New York Times writes this very serious article that Levin and Landmark Legal nominated Rush Limbaugh for the Nobel Prize. And at the end they said, and they're not even able to do it. They're not qualified to do it. I said, these people are stupid. So Rush and I, and we're all laughing and laughing. Look at all the press. And it went on. AP, they all wrote stories about Rush Nobel Prize. Should he get the Nobel Prize? He's controversial. In no way should he get... And we just laughed for about 2 weeks as that went on. There was a lot of things like that where we spent a Thanksgiving with him at his home and so forth. He was nicer than people even say, who say he's nice. He was more generous than people even say. He was smarter than people even say. He read and read and read, morning, noon, and night. He had hated college. By the way, I hated college. He went a different way. He dropped out. He said, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Me, I said, let me get through this quickly, and I did my thing. He did his thing. We had so many things in common. He was just a dear, dear friend, and I miss him a ton. And the truth is that he, Sean, Hannity, and I were all very tight, all very, very good friends. And I miss him a lot. But this is the book where he wrote the introduction, Men in Black. You may have heard about this. This was really the book that I wrote first that took off. And then publishers started competing. Oh, will you write a book for us, and so forth and so on. And I've never looked back when it comes to writing books again. The last thing I'll say about him is this. He was a big Donald Trump fan. He was also a big Ted Cruz fan, by the way. But he was a big Donald Trump fan. And I think they had a lot in common in many ways. They went against the system. They did things their way. They are both attacked for doing things their way. They speak their mind, both of them. And they were attacked for that. They were hated by the left, hated by the media, where in his case is in Donald Trump's case, because of their reach, because of their ability to persuade, because of their popularity with what we call the common man, even though I don't think there's such a thing, but I'll play along. The common man, Mr. and Mrs. America, as I call them. They had an appeal, a charisma, an intelligence, a way about them that really sparked interest and support and love. And 5 years ago in a day, he passed away. The last few months, he knew he was passing away. He fought that damn cancer with everything he had. And one of the things he missed when he was fighting cancer, he got very sick from the treatments, was radio. He loved radio. He made radio what it became. There were conservative hosts and so forth. But Rush was Rush, and there'll never be another Rush. I'll tell you one other story. I've got his line up. with Rush. You know, they targeted him. The state attorney down there that covers Palm Beach was a big-time Democrat and started targeting Rush and went after Rush about his, he had pain, very, very bad pain down his back and so forth. And he'd had a procedure done and it didn't turn out well. Anyway, without getting into all the details, he would take some pain medicines. And he so loved you. He so loved his audience. He told you everything that was going on. That it got out of control, the pain medicines and so forth. And you remember he took a period of time off of radio, and he loved radio. That you were his family. That is what he wanted to do every minute of the day. And let me tell you something. He did research every minute of the day. He was online every minute of the day. And quite frankly, so am I for most of the time when I do radio and I do Fox, and now I'm doing this. But that prosecutor decided to go after him. And I felt it was so outrageous what they were doing. And then we did our research, I did, and we saw that Florida had some of the most liberal FOIA rules of any state. That is, you could get information out of the files of the government, phone calls, texts, and all the rest of it, that you might not be able to get in other states. So I decided, you know what, I want to dig into this prosecutor's background and so forth, and I want to dig into his conduct because the leaks were incessant. The leak to the liberal media all through South Florida, into the wire services about their investigation of Rush, attacking Rush, on and on and on, because always they wanted to take Rush out. Rush was monitored, every word he would say. You had Media Matters, you had all these groups. And so I decided, let's fire back. And so we started to gather information on the prosecutor. And first they dragged their feet. So we brought a case against him and them. And then the information we were gathering on the phone calls and so forth, because I wanted to see which reporters they were calling. So this got into a big battle. And I just remember the prosecutor told Rush's personal lawyer, who the hell is this guy Mark Levin? What's this group Landmark Legal Foundation? And Rush's lawyer laughed. He said he has no idea what he's up against, this guy. But in the end, Rush was innocent. He'd always been innocent. But what he did and what that showed America was how human he was and is, no pretenses. He didn't want you to think he was something different than he actually was. What you heard over the microphone was Rush Limbaugh, the real Rush Limbaugh. The only caveat to that is he was very shy. Not with buddies, not with friends, but in public he was very shy. Many of you may have met him at his early rallies and so forth. He would smile. He would take it all in. He was amazed at the support, the thousands of people who would show up. This was Rush Limbaugh, who was criticized because he didn't go to college for one semester. He said, what the hell am I doing here? I'm getting out of here. And that's what he did. Truly an American story, truly a self-made man. And I think about him often. All right, let's get on to this topic of Iran. Why Iran? You know, this always amazes me. When you look at the editorial decisions the news media make on their various platforms as to what is a priority and what's not, it is amazing to me. You can tell that they're driving an agenda or that they're in it for ratings. If they think something's hot, I see more and more sort of the National Enquirer type activity going on in so-called mainstream media, which was never mainstream. It was always left-wing. Early on, it was left of center. Now it's just crazy left-wing. Iran is a dire threat to humanity. I spent a little bit of time yesterday talking about the mindset of the Islamists, and in a future show we're going to spend a lot of time on it. But the mindset of the Islamists, the fundamentalists, the jihadis, call them whatever you want, goes back to the 7th century. It's primitive, it's barbaric. That's why you see with Hamas, the raping, the pillaging, the debauchery. This is the mindset. And when it's applied to a religious faith, and it's a fundamentalist ideology that is used in practicing that religious faith, you can see the danger. And then when you layer that on top of access to cutting-edge modern technology, nuclear technology, missile technology, and people never talk about this with Iran, chemical technology, biological technology, because Iran's working on that now. Humanity is threatened. And then on top of that, when that regime is supported by a communist regime in China, which is a whole other ideological issue, which we've delved into a little bit yesterday, and I will delve into much more in the days and weeks and months ahead. And a fascist, in the case of Putin, sort of a mix of communism, but not really, a flat-out fascist. That's also helping Iran. You can see how dangerous this is. And so when we have these isolationists, as we did in the 1930s, they're going to get us all killed. They're the ones who are going to create World War III. When you have entities like this who keep building weapons of mass destruction, keep using and stealing from us and others cutting-edge modern technology, you can see on the horizon we are people who have the ability to reason, right? How communist China is building up its military. Its navy is now larger than ours. Clearly, its ground forces are much larger than ours. Its technology is catching up with us because they've stolen most of it from us. They're building nuclear subs. They're building aircraft carriers. They're building missile systems. 30 years ago, they didn't have a nuclear weapon. Now they have thousands of them, and they're going to have more than us in about 7 or 8 years. They're working with the Iranians, who are desperately trying to get missiles that can reach us with nuclear warheads. Why? To threaten us? No. To kill us. Remember, I said it's 7th century. And I want to underscore the point. If a regime is willing to kill 50,000 of its own people in 72 hours or so, still slaughtering them as I speak to you right now, it's just not prioritized by the media. They're busy with other things right now, like AOC or Newscom or things like that. You better believe they'd be willing to shoot a nuclear warhead into our country, more than one, multiple nuclear warheads, because they believe Allah has directed them to do so. That is, you must destroy all that comes between you and God, between your faith, Islamic ideology, and God. You can't have the Jews, the Christians, the Hindus, the Buddhists, the atheists, the agnostic. You can't even have Muslims who don't buy into your terrorist ideology. They got to go. Talk about Islamophobia. I mean, the people practicing Islamophobia are Islamists. But that aside. So we have people in this country who either ignore all this or they look at it and they decide, we're the problem? We're going to trigger World War III by responding to this? By trying to keep this in a box? By trying to eliminate this danger before it becomes really so big we can't eliminate it? People who have us pass this on to our children and grandchildren, future generations, should they exist? And we're supposed to act like it's no big deal and forever wars and remind everybody of Vietnam and Korea and Afghanistan. This is lunacy. And here's the thing about that. We had a group that stole this nomenclature, America First, in the 1930s. You've heard about these. You've heard me talk about it. They were strict isolationists. There's Hitler is on the rise. He's made alliances with Imperial Japan and fascistic Italy. And they are attacking, and they are spreading. through Europe, through Southeast Asia, and other places. They're literally expanding. They're even attacking Britain now, in the case of Germany, Nazi Germany. And we have these forces in the United States, which numbered in the hundreds of thousands, by the way, almost 1 million people, who said, America first, unless we are attacked, unless our continent is attacked, we're not getting involved. Now, Franklin Roosevelt, who I don't like, but to his credit, was trying to figure out a way, how do I get us to participate in the defense of Britain? But Congress won't go along. The American people oppose it. He had this lease plan he set up. Basically, we were giving Britain some ammunition, some weaponry, some support, not enough clearly, but he characterized it as lending and leasing, not giving and supporting the war effort. And so what happened? Imperial Japan, Tojo, they saw America as weak. Germany saw America as weak. Italy saw America as weak. We were not even prepared. We hadn't built up our military because we had this isolationist point of view. So we weren't prepared even if we were attacked. And we were attacked at Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. And you know what? If our aircraft carriers had been there, the entire West Coast would have been open to the Japanese Navy to attack. It's by luck that those carriers weren't there. And the Japanese, despite all the damage that was done at Pearl Harbor, to all those ships, the destroyers and so forth, they said the carriers weren't there. We didn't get the carriers. And that's when Yamamoto famously said, it was recorded, when all the other admirals are cheering and the rest of them, look what we've done. We defeated the United States Navy, he said. I fear we've awakened a sleeping tiger. You see, Yamamoto went to school in the United States, and he knew that this blow in Pearl Harbor had to be a death blow, and it wasn't. I fear we've awakened a sleeping tiger. Some said he said sleeping giant, but you get the point. I give this context because my fear with the isolationist wing, it's not even a wing, it's just, the cabal, gaggle, is that they persuade some people as influencers, at least their listeners and their followers, that those who see reality and use their brains to reason through what's taking place and say, when the 7th century throwback regime is slaughtering its own people, has killed about 1,000 Americans, has funded attacks on Americans all over the world, seeks to assassinate our president, tells us what they want to do to our country, we might want to pay attention to that. Because if they do get nuclear warheads, or they do get 10,000 ballistic missiles, or they do attack and defeat our ally Israel, I don't think they'll ever defeat them, but attack them, and then attack other allies and so forth and so on, which they do not necessarily militarily, but they do through terrorism and coup plots and so forth, and continue to fund the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas and Hezbollah and all the other alphabet soup of terrorist organizations, Islamist organizations, how can you put your head in the sand when this is going on? You can't. Donald Trump is not an interventionist. He hates war, but he's a reasonable man. He's a rational person, and he loves our country. That's why he makes the decisions he makes, and that's why he'll make the right decision on this. And I believe that's why we're building our military level to such a significant level. And I want to get into this with you. There's also the moral imperative. People seem to think, you don't go to war over a moral imperative. Oh, yes, you do. Sometimes it's so horrendous what's taking place that as a human being, you say, we have to help these people. There's something we need to do. All these issues combine to more than justify, to urge us to take action against the regime in Iran. It's weaker than it's ever been in 47 years. Weaker than it's ever been, thanks to the Israelis in the 12-day war, thanks to us helping the Israelis, thanks to us attacking their nuclear sites. But they're not going to stop. They've said they're not going to stop. And satellite pictures are showing us they're not going to stop. They're still at it. They're telling us what they're at. The problem the West has, and people in the United States, not you, but a lot of people, they don't understand the mindset of this enemy. Think about the Japanese kamikazes. It was almost a religious fervor mixed with nationalism. The emperor was treated like a god. The emperor. When the emperor spoke, everybody listened. When the emperor gave an order, everybody listened. But Tojo, really the commander effectively, as he became, of the Japanese military and Japanese forces, he was really pulling the strings for the most part. Think of that. The kamikazes who flew their planes into our ships and so forth and so on, closer to the end of the war. Think about the Battle of Okinawa, those of you who may be aware of it, where we took more casualties than any other battle. I mean, even more than the Battle of the Bulge. I mean, it was unbelievable. That's why Truman said, we can't send 1 million troops to Japan, the island of Japan, to fight, given the casualties we had in Okinawa, which is an island of Japan off of main Japan. And that's why those 2 atomic bombs were dropped. But think of the kamikazes and then think of the Islamists. But think of kamikazes with fingers on red buttons firing off nuclear missiles at the United States. It's not the same mentality, but in the end it's the same consequence, the same result. The regime in Japan had to be defeated. Not a conditional surrender. Truman said it must be destroyed. It must be destroyed. It's the same thing with Iran. And we cannot leave this to our children and grandchildren to do, because they won't be able to do it. If Iran had 50 nuclear missiles today, what would we be doing? We couldn't do much. And we have to make sure that it doesn't. And again, the moral imperative, they're slaughtering people left and right. These people are Westerners in many respects. They're Persian. They're our friends. They were our friends. And that regime is slaughtering them because those people want freedom. They want to protect their families. They want to put food on the table. We can't do that all over the world, of course, nor should we. But when we can, and it also has the overlapping benefit of benefiting us and our children and grandchildren, we must. Now let's get into this in a little bit of detail. What are we exactly amassing over there? First of all, we have from the Times of Israel, former IDF military intelligence chief Amos Yadlin suggests that a military confrontation between the U.S. and Iran could begin in the coming days. He said, last week I allowed myself to fly to the Munich Security Conference. I would think twice about flying abroad from Israel this weekend, he said to Channel 12. We're much closer than we were before, but I remind you, a superpower does not go to war in a matter of days. There is a diplomatic path that must be exhausted, says Yadlin, who now heads a national security consultancy group. Many oppose the attack. The Pentagon is not clear what they want to achieve. The president is very determined. The statement that all options are on the table is based on a credible military threat, which comes alongside the preparations off the coast of Iran and in the skies. Yesterday, he said, last week, as U.S. and Iranian negotiators held talks for the second time, open-source flight tracking data showed that the U.S. military had moved dozens of fighter jets toward the Middle East in a day, 50 of our top jets. In addition to all the jets on those aircraft carriers, USS Abraham Lincoln, USS Gerald Ford, in addition to all the jets we have in our bases over there, we have smaller bases over there nobody ever talks about, but we do, as well as that base in Qatar. The aircraft included F-22s, F-35s, F-16 jets, Several refuelers were also spotted on the move, according to social media accounts dedicated to tracking military flights. Then we have this, which is more recent today, from Axios, Barak Ravid. Barak Ravid is a mouthpiece for the left. He's a mouthpiece for the left in Israel. He hates Netanyahu. He hates the Likud party. He used to write for a newspaper that is a horrendous radical left-wing paper called Haaretz. And now he's at Axios, which is also left-wing, by the way, in America. But he's also a source for leaks against Netanyahu in our administration, from Congress, from anybody. He gives them anonymous coverage, and so they don't expose themselves. Sometimes he'll interview, like the president on the record and so forth, but most of his reporting is kind of sleazy, I would argue. But I'm going to read this because somebody has given him information that may be useful for us to know, so you have it in your brain system and can digest what you want to believe and what you don't want to believe. But I wanted to read it to you. The Trump administration is closer to a major war in the Middle East than most Americans realize. By the way, I believe this too, and I'll tell you why in a moment. It could begin very soon. A U.S. military operation in Iran would likely be a massive, weeks-long campaign that would look more like full-fledged war than last month's pinpoint operation in Venezuela, sources say. He writes, a U.S. military operation in Iran would likely be a massive, weeks-long campaign that would look more like full-fledged war than last month's pinpoint operation in Venezuela, sources say. I agree with this. I don't know who's leaking, but I'll tell you why I agree with it. The armadas, plural, that we have sent to the Middle East, the number of jets, the refueling planes, and all the rest of it is not intended for a pinpoint hit. It's intended for a massive attack with options, depending on what takes place during the course of the attack. And that's why I think it's taken this amount of time to pull all this together, which also should send up a red flag. It should not take this much time. I understand why it has. Our military has shrunk. Our Navy has shrunk. We don't have enough pilots. That's what Biden did to the military. That's what Obama did to the military. And when the president said, you know, we spend about $1 trillion on the military, we need to spend another $500 billion, $1.5 trillion, he's not kidding. Because I want you to think about this. If we had to move these armadas across oceans and so forth over a period of weeks, and we were fighting China, do you think they'd have a clear path? No, they'd be attacking them right in the middle of the ocean. We'd be at war from the moment our ships left our shores or before. So this tells me Iran, which really doesn't have much of an air force or much of a navy, that can't really project force right now, other than these missiles and these warheads they want to build, but in a more conventional sense. That's not easy, but much easier to deal with than a fully armed communist China with a massive navy, a massive air force, and all these kinds of weapons. So this, to me, has also told us, and I don't know why anybody else isn't talking about this, we're not ready for a major war with a major country. We've got to build up our military. It's not being built up. When Reagan built up the military, he built up to 5% of the GDP. We're still at like 2-3% of GDP, maybe less. We pay more interest on the debt than we pay than we have in the military budget. Let's go on. The sources noted it would likely be a joint U.S.-Israeli campaign that's much broader in scope, more existential for the regime than the Israeli-led 12-day war last June, which the U.S. eventually joined to take out Iran's underground nuclear facilities. I was attacked, particularly online, by the usual isolationist know-nothings when I said, now is the time to take out that regime. We have the Israelis. They've taken out the ground-to-air missile systems the Russians had given them. They've taken out most of the radar. They've taken out key military assets and bases in Iran. Let them finish the job. Remember that, Mr. Producer? Oh, Mark's a warmonger. No, I'm a peacemonger. I'm a peacemonger. So now we've had to build up these armadas and everything else. We were there. Get it over with. But we need to get it over with now, one way or another. Now, such a war would have a dramatic influence on the entire region and major implications for the remaining 3 years of the Trump presidency. Yes, but it would have a positive effect on the region. I've heard people say, well, what would replace that regime in Iran? Could it be worse? I don't even... What? They might try to build nuclear weapons? How worse can it be? And if it's worse, we'll deal with it. I mean, these questions that are asked are okay, but we're dealing with a dire threat right now. And the people of Iran are dealing with it every single day. And we told them, our president told them, continue to protest, take down names, help is on the way. And he was right to say that. With the attention of Congress and the public otherwise occupied, there's little public debate about what could be the most consequential U.S. military intervention in the Middle East in at least a decade. It would be bigger than that, which is why my second show on Liberty's Voice is this subject, because the media are not covering it well enough, which is why I address it on radio, which is why I address it on my show on Fox, Life, Liberty, and Levin. Because if I'm not laser-focused explaining this, more often than most, nobody is, and I don't get it. I don't get it. Now, nobody will stop talking about it once action is taken, and that's important. But we have so many shiny objects, and the media is so activist and propagandistic in terms of their attacks on Trump, their attacks on ICE. It's foggy, it's unrealistic. And so I want to use this platform, as I use my other platforms, to try and break through. This is why I detest so much some of these so-called podcasters who are wasting our time, attacking the spirit of the nation, who are racists and bigots and Jew haters and Christian haters, who are doing the job of the enemy. We have all these Tokyo Roses out there. Who's Tokyo Rose? Google it. We have all these Tokyo Roses out there who are giving aid and comfort to our enemies. Let's go on. They write, Trump came close to striking Iran in early January over the killing of thousands of protesters by the regime, but when the window of opportunity passed, the administration shifted to a two-track approach, nuclear talks paired with a massive military buildup. By delaying and bringing so much force to bear, Trump has raised expectations for what an operation would look like if a deal can't be reached. And right now, a deal does not look likely. Reading from Axios, consider the source, Barak Ravid. But so far, I agree with what he's written. You know, it's like anything else. What do they say? A broken clock is right twice a day. Okay, same with a broken journalist, perhaps. Although probably not right twice a day, maybe once a month. Trump's advisors, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, met with Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Yabadabadou, for 3 hours in Geneva on Tuesday. Oh, they're going to wait in 2 more weeks. I hope that's a head fake. Sure, we'll talk in 2 weeks. Hammer them before 2 weeks. Now, keep in mind, next week is the State of the Union address. So the question is, do we go before the State of the Union? After the State of the Union? Not clear to me. To me, the sooner the better, because time is not necessarily on our side. Yes, we can keep building up assets, but the enemy can keep building up defenses or strategies for trying to evade what we are likely to do or might do. Meanwhile, people are being slaughtered over there. I was told yesterday and today, that regime has really intensified its genocide, slaughtering, murdering people who are in prisons and so forth. And yet the people are still trying to rise up. The people want us to help them. I want us to help them. Mr. and Mrs. America. By helping them, we're helping ourselves. We're helping ourselves. It's the right thing to do. He goes on, while both sides said the talks made progress, the gaps are wide and U.S. officials aren't optimistic about closing them. Vice President Vance told Fox News the talks went well in some ways, but in other ways it was very clear the president has set some red lines that the Iranians are not yet willing to actually acknowledge and work through. And Vance made it clear that while Trump wants a deal, he could determine that diplomacy has reached its natural end. And of course, Mark says Sure, we'll sign this. Well, what do you want us to sign at some point? We'll act like we're tough negotiators. We'll tough it out. Okay, we'll sign this. Yeah. Then they go back to Tehran and they say, there it is. But they might want to save face, too. We're not going to agree to, pull back on ballistic missiles. We're not going to agree on this, that, or the other thing, because internally, for Khomeini and that regime, maybe they can't sign an agreement. But whether they sign one or not, to me, is really not the issue. The fact is, they need to go. North Korea signed a lot of agreements with us, with Europe, with the United Nations, cheated and lied every time. We denuclearized South Korea. We took out our nukes. North Korea said, if we do that, they won't build any nuclear weapons. We did that, and now they have 50 nuclear weapons, 6 or 7 more every year, and South Korea is none. They go on. Trump's armada has grown to include 2 aircraft carriers, 12 warships, hundreds of fighter jets, and multiple air defense systems. Some of that firepower is still on the way. More than 150 U.S. military cargo flights have moved weapons, systems, and ammunition to the Middle East. This is a massive armada, a massive move. Massive. Just in the past 24 hours, another 50 jet fighters, F-35s, F-22s, and F-16s headed to the region. The standoff with Iran has gone on so long that many Americans are likely numb to it, he writes. War could come sooner and be much bigger than most recognized sources say. Trump's military and rhetorical buildups make it hard for him to back down without major concessions from Iran on its nuclear program. This is his opinion. It's not in Trump's nature, and his advisors don't view the deployment of all that hardware as a bluff. I agree with that, and I also believe that if Donald Trump decides military action is needed, we're not going to lose. We must defeat them, and defeat them means crush them, not leave them to stand another day. Donald Trump is not a loser. He's a winner. You want to know what I think? 2 cents worth. I think we are going to attack Iran. I think this information, to some extent, if not largely, is correct. I think it'll be a massive attack. I think it could last for weeks. It's not necessarily going to be easy. I think the brunt of the response will be taken by Israel, which is why I think Netanyahu early on was tapping the brakes to make sure they have their defensive missiles in place, because they used a whole bunch of them in the 12-day war, and they need to be prepared for their cities, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and other cities, and there are many others, to be hit. It's a tiny country, and those ballistic missiles can easily reach Israel. So all these potentialities have to be planned for, and I think that is literally what's going on. I think the president would rather not go to war, but I think it's unavoidable that this enemy makes it clear every single day. And I want to say something to the Iranian people. The president said help is on the way. I believe help is on the way. And let me end the program by saying this. Get Khomeini. Get him, eliminate him. That's enough. He's a mass murderer. Get Khomeini. I want to encourage you, as we're just beginning this program, if you like it, share it. Tell your friends and family, go online to join us on Liberty's Voice. It's very simple. You can follow us on Rumble, or you can subscribe on YouTube. I'll see you next time.